In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a loaf of sourdough as quickly as possible. I'm Dylan, and this is Good You Cook. Flour, water and salt. 3 simple ingredients, but more ways to turn them into bread than you can count. I have found that there are about 4 key steps that need to be right. Aside from that, it's really open to interpretation as to what is the best techniques, timing and ratios. Our 4 key steps are: have good gas, have good gluten, have a good crust, and have a good crumb. In this video, I'm going to show you the recipe that I like to use, but let's focus more on getting those key steps right. Unlike many recipes, this method will finish your loaf on the same day that you start it. You want to allow about an 8-hour turnaround. It's actually pretty good for sourdough. Basically, we're going to use heaps of starter compared to other styles. I'm talking 500 grams instead of 50 grams. So key step number 1, have good gas. I go into detail about making a sourdough starter in the previous video. Hopefully you haven't skipped ahead, because if it's not right, your bread won't work. So we combine 500 grams of good sourdough starter with 275 grams of warm water. Then we add 500 grams of flour. I'm using plain white flour. Except for self-raising, you can use whatever you like. We leave it to soak for 30 minutes. This soaking is called autolyse. While that's happening, measure out your salt. I like to use 20 grams. After the 30 minutes or more, mix in your salt and turn it all out onto an unfloured bench. Now, key step number 2, have good gluten. In the last video, I talked about the gas blowing up a balloon. Right now, it would be more like trying to blow up a sock. Gluten is the spider web that traps the gas, so we need good gluten. We do this by agitating the dough. If you want to cheat, you could try a stand mixer, but it's just not the same. I find doing it by hand is better anyway. This is called stretch and fold, because we stretch, then fold. Stretch and fold until you hate sourdough. I could say it takes 5 minutes, or 25 minutes. It really just comes down to your effort. Over time, your dough will go from looking a bit like a drop pie to a smooth, silky dough, I guess. We will know it is ready because you can stretch your dough so thin, you'll pretty much be able to see through it before it breaks. This is called the Windowpane Test. There are other ways to get to this key point, but this is the fastest way to make sure that it's right. Only when you have a good window pane can you know that you've got good gluten. Then you should move on. On to lightly flouring your bench. Gently place your dough in the middle, and then, almost like wrapping a present, we fold 4 corners into the center one at a time. On the last fold, I like to do this because it makes me feel fancy. Now we round it. It's a bit of a twisting and tucking motion like this. This is my favourite part of making the dough because it looks so legit. Anyway, place your dough into a lightly oiled bowl and leave it to rise, loosely covered, for 3 to 4 hours. If you suddenly remembered you don't have all day to make bread, you can place your dough into the fridge at this point and come back tomorrow. If you do, just bring it out an hour or 2 before you're ready to get up to room temperature. Then continue on to shaping. Welcome to shaping. Carefully tip out your dough onto a lightly floured bench. Fold your dough up like a present. Do the fancy thing. Round, and then we try to develop some surface tension. We are basically stretching the skin as tight as we can, while forming more or less our final shape. This is the point where you want good gluten. This step takes practice. A little flour does help, but when you're making sourdough, you always want to try and refrain from adding flour. I'm going to show you 2 methods to make the bread. Method 1 uses a basket and a Dutch oven. These tools make it look like the real deal. But if you don't have those, you can go to method 2 and just use a loaf tin. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Either way, the final rise is in a container that gives the bread its final shape. If you have a proofing basket or banneton, dust it with an unreasonable amount of flour. Ignore what I said earlier about not adding flour, because that was in the past. If you're using a loaf tin, you don't need to add flour at this point, as this is your final cooking vessel. Whichever you are using, turn your dough into it. For the banner tin, you want top side facing down, and the loaf tin, you want top side facing top side. Loosely cover it and let it rise one more time, approximately 2 hours. An hour before it's ready, crank up your oven to 260 degrees Celsius or as high as it can go. If you're using a Dutch oven, let that heat up in there too. If you're using a loaf tin, heat up a roasting tray near the bottom of the oven. Once your oven is at temperature, we are finally going to make some bread. For method 1, with the Dutch oven and banner tin, cut a sheet of baking paper to the size of your Dutch oven. Then, tip out your dough onto the baking paper. For both methods, we now score the dough. This helps the bread rise evenly and not randomly explode out the side. It was also kind of like a signature back in the day. For method 1, we place the baking paper and dough into the Dutch oven and put the lid on, and then throw it in the oven. For method 2, place your loaf tin in the oven and then pour some boiling water into the roasting tray down the bottom at the very last second, quickly closing the door afterwards to trap the steam, working as quickly as possible to conserve as much heat as you can. For both methods, this is achieving the same thing. Your bread will do all of its rising in the first 20 minutes. We want lots of steam during that 20 minutes so a crust doesn't form. Hard to blow up a balloon if it's crusty, hey? After 20 minutes, you can reduce your oven temperature to about 200 degrees Celsius. Remove the lid from your Dutch oven if you're using that. If using the loaf tins, all of the steam should have evaporated from the boiling water. Now, I have found that the breads that I thought I'd taken too far were the best tasting. So keep going until you're deeply uncomfortable with your crust situation. Or about 30 minutes if you're scared. And that is key step number 3, have a good crust. Key step number 4, have a good crumb. The crumb is the proper term for the inside of your bread. The way we get a good crumb is by letting it cool down for at least an hour, preferably 2. That whole time it's still cooking. If you cut into it before then, all of the steam inside is going to escape, and then you're just going to have a doughy, artisan paperweight. If you do wait an hour or 2, it's still going to be warm and magical inside. At this point, you can now dive in and experience what is likely to be a very special moment. Look, if not, don't worry, I've been there too. It took me a few goes to get a yummy bread. The next video is about issues I've had, how to fix them, as well as other little tips and fun facts to do with making sourdough bread from scratch. Once again, I'm Dylan, and thank you for watching.